Hello and welcome to the latest EnvCast episode. EnvCast is a Society for the Environment podcast, bringing you environmental professionals in conversation each month. Each episode is designed to provide insight into the life of registered environmental professionals, featuring experts from across a wide range of sectors and disciplines. We explore what they do, why they do it, how they got to where they are now, and their future ambitions. Each guest has verified their environmental credentials by achieving Chartered Environmentalist, Registered Environmental Practitioner, or Registered Environmental Technician registration. To learn more about the Society for the Environment or our environmental registrations, please visit socenv.org.uk. That's socenv.org.uk. Enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to this month's EnvCast episode. My name is Phil Underwood, the Engagement Manager here at the Society for the Environment. Today, I am pleased to be joined by yet another one of our nearly 8,000 Chartered Environmentalists, this time a leader in the UK water sector and one of the newest Society for the Environment board members. I am, of course, talking about Natalie Akroyd. Thank you very much for joining us, Natalie.
Oh, you're very welcome. Pleased to be here.
Now, I invited you along based on a LinkedIn post that I saw, and it completely slipped my mind at the time that you had literally become a new Society for the Environment board member as well. So the two combined ended up quite nicely to invite you on. But I'll come back to the LinkedIn post later. Before that, as always on EnvCast, I'm going to hand over to you as our guest to give us a bit of a flavour of what you currently do in your job and any other commitments around that.
Okay. So hi everyone. So I've been in the water industry in the UK now for nearly 20 years, which is quite frightening, straight out of university. And I currently work as the head of water strategy and environment for South Staffs Water and for Cambridge Water. So that means that my role looks after all of the day-to-day water resources planning, so drought management, making sure that we're compliant with our abstraction licences and that we have everything that we need in the right places at the right times, but also the long-term planning side of things as well. So making sure we complete our water resource management plans, which we actually submitted this week. So looking at the next 25 years of water resources we need in our area. And we do our drought management plans as well. And climate change adaptation reports, etc. My team are also responsible, as it says in my title, that's the water strategy bit. We also do the environment part, so we look after the water industry national environment programme for both South Staffs and for Cambridge Water. So that's any environmental improvements that we make across both of our regions. They can be directly related to the amount of water we abstract, but they can also be things like hydromorphological changes to rivers. So quite a broad range of things that we undertake in that programme. I've been at South Staffs in Cambridge now for about a year and a half. Prior to that, pretty much my whole career at Severn Trent Water. I think that's me.
Okay, and we're recording this podcast in October 2022. So this year in the UK, in the summer, there's been some droughts. I assume, and you mentioned droughts there, drought management plans and so on. Has that increased your workload a little bit over the last few months?
Yeah, just a little bit, yeah. Quite considerably, I'd say, yes. Yeah, so as I say, we operate in two regions, so South Staffs and Cambridge Water. Both of those regions are in drought. And we have very different setups in both regions, particularly in the South Staffs region. We're very heavily reliant on the River Severn, which is regulated by the Environment Agency as well. So there's an awful lot of work going on, not only to manage our own resources, but to make sure that we're protecting the environment. We're working with the Environment Agency, other water companies, trying to balance our customers' needs against the environment needs, and hopefully praying for rain a lot as well at the moment. So nice wet wind.
Currently, it is throwing it down outside my window.
It is at mine as well.
Okay, well, that's good in a way. It's good.
It is. It doesn't make you very popular with your friends because you're always praying for rain, but it's definitely the life of water resources.
This is true. A few rain dances at the weekend. You mentioned balancing environmental needs with customer needs and so on, and you mentioned environment plans as well. What does that? Could you explain that a little bit more? Expand on what would be in those environment plans, what in terms of, so their plans, what happens in terms of the implementations of them as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we develop our environment plans on a 5-yearly basis. So we're currently developing the ones that will impact between 2025 and 2030. And we submit those to the Environment Agency this November. And obviously we're already in a 5-year period where we're undertaking a lot of work. And as you say, there's kind of a balance between investigation work and implementation work. So some of it, and a large proportion, relates directly to the amount of water that we take out of the environment. So our customers, how much they use directly, obviously, is directly relevant to how much we take out of the environment. So how can we balance the needs of our customers, but make sure we're not taking too much from the environment? So quite a bit of investigation work to make sure that we're not having a negative impact in areas. And where there's areas where we think there could be future deterioration, how do we reduce our abstraction rates in order to protect the environment from that? The next part then is about implementation, as you say, and there's a wide range of things that we look at there. So it can be reducing our abstraction, but also we're doing a lot of work this 5-year period on eels and protecting eels. So putting eel screens in a lot of our intakes to make sure that we're not having a negative impact there. We do some more work with other kind of species that we're trying to look at protecting and enhancing. So brown trout is a classic one for us at the moment that we're doing a lot of work on. Invasive species, how can we prevent that through our work? Where can we undertake kind of positive steps to eradicate them where we can see them? They're waterborne and kind of flora and fauna based as well. So there's quite a wide range of things that we look at. We also look at a big programme that we call our catchment management programme, and that's about reducing pollution at source before it gets into any of our groundwater or surface water that we then have to clean for drinking water. So we work with farmers and landowners in order to kind of educate them and help support them with measures and grants and funds in order to kind of reduce runoff from agricultural land, prevent phosphates, nitrates getting into our and other fertilisers getting into our watercourses. So solving things at source rather than when they get to our gates. So.
Wow. So there's a few stakeholders involved. You've got the Environment Agency, landowners, I assume maybe ecologists?
Yeah, a lot of environmental NGOs. We get, particularly in our Cambridge water region, because we are chalk stream based over there. So a lot of work that we'll be doing in the next 5-year period, looking at enhancing and protecting chalk streams in particular. And they will be kind of whole catchment approaches, which is quite a new thing really for the water industry. We've traditionally kind of kept to doing the things that are solely within our control and our remit. Now we're looking at how we can engage with wider groups. So we've got a project going on the River Granter, which is a big chalk stream, working with some really engaged farmers and landowners about how we could make some changes on their land to help slow the flows down, keep the water in the system, reduce flooding that way, etc. And then we'll work with other interested parties, whether it be the RSPB, whether it be the wildlife trusts. We're doing a lot of work over there with those as well, to try and make sure that if we all work together to try and get the right outcome, we'll do it more efficiently, we'll do it more effectively, and we'll do it quicker. But it is, as you say, it's quite a new thing for us, and it's quite trying to balance different stakeholder needs in quite a wide group. It can be a challenge at times, but I think it's great that there are so many people keen to do so much. It's just how we kind of coordinate that moving forwards.
Yeah. When you say it's quite new, is this in terms of the environment side of things, is that something that's becoming more and more prevalent in your role or in the water sector more widely?
Yes, I think we've had a water industry national environment programme for many years now. Every 5-year period, it gathers pace and it gets bigger. As we realise and as we've kind of taken in more of that role of environmental stewardship as a water company. So, and that's really supported by our customers. We do a lot of customer engagement and say, what do you think our role is as a water company? And more we're seeing our customers say, it's really important you protect the environment. It's really important you tell us as customers what that link is between the environment and the water that comes out of our taps, and tell us how we can help as well. And are prepared to kind of pay a little bit more in their bills. And obviously we've got a really big cost of living crisis at the moment that we have to counterbalance with that. But how we work with our customers to then say, yeah, this is what we think you should do as a water company, and we can then build that into our plans a bit more. So as I say, they're growing all the time in size and the range of activities that we're stepping into and taking hold of.
Okay. Am I right in saying that most of what we've just spoken about there is linked to your work with Staff's Water and Cambridge Water.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Does your role as technical director at Water Resources East, does that differ?
Yeah, a little bit, but kind of it just builds on it, really. So as technical director, Water Resources East, we are building a regional water resources plan. So at Cambridge, I'm just looking at Cambridge Water. Water Resources East is looking at all of the water companies in the East, but not just them, everybody that works in the water sector as well. So what are the agricultural needs for the next 25 years? Energy needs, any other industries that we've got, as well as the environmental needs, of course. And we're pulling all of that together to say, what does the East of England need over the next 25 years, and how do we achieve that? So water companies are very well kind of set up now to do these sort of processes. We know what our needs are, we know what our supplies are. It's very difficult for individual farmers, for example, who also have abstraction licenses that the Environment Agency manage. How do they get an extra source if that's capped because of water body levels, etc.? So how do we help a really big community of individuals with their future water needs and make that more efficient and effective? So at Water Resources East, yes, I've got a water company hat on one factor, but actually I'm there to represent the entire of the East of England water sector, make sure that it's all getting a voice, including the environment, and that we kind of plan for absolutely all of that and have a true multi-sector plan, because that's the only way we're really going to solve the kind of water situation, particularly that we have in the East and the Southeast, where we've got these real scarcity issues moving forwards.
Okay, that's quite a wide-ranging couple of roles you've got there.
Yeah, keeps them busy.
Yeah, I imagine so. In terms of your career, did the technical director role stem from your role within South Staff's Water and Cambridge Water? Or
Yeah. So Cambridge Water is a founding member. It's one of the kind of key partners of Water Resources East. And Water Resources East works, it's got a very direct team as well of direct employees, but it also seconds people in to make sure that we're getting the links into the needs of different sectors. So at the moment, it's a kind of a temporary secondment for a couple of days a week. And then that will potentially move about as we look to bring in more people from agriculture to strengthen that side, for example, as we move forward.
Okay. In terms of your again, back to in terms of your career, is that did you want to go down that route and have that extra responsibility as a development opportunity, or do you feel like it's something where you can make more of a difference? Or
I think it's both. Like I am a bit of a geek, so I am really passionate about what I do, and I love any opportunity to be able to broaden my knowledge and my experience, but also to do something, kind of make more of a difference, make more of an impact. And so I really felt that this role, gave me some skills and opportunities, and I would definitely learn from it. But primarily, I felt that there were different sectors that probably don't have a voice, that this is really critical stuff. And it sounds really cheesy, but kind of really being able to see the legacy impacts of what you're doing, because it's this long-term planning. I'm kind of making sure that my daughter, my grandchildren, etc., are set up for the future, and the environment is as well, and that I can really feel something tangible there that I've delivered, and get to the end of my career, as awful as that sounds, and go, I really feel like I made a difference, and not just in this tiny little section over here. I feel I've made a difference to something larger, something bigger.
I'm doing the same thing in a much smaller way, but I certainly get the idea of where you're going with that one. It is nice to feel like you're making a difference in your day-to-day role. What kind of requirements did you need to show to be able to get the roles that you're in at the moment? Did you need specific qualifications, or did you need to be a member of a professional body or anything like that?
Yeah, so for pretty much all of my roles, so I've always been a member of the Institute of Water since I joined the water industry, and the value of being in a kind of institute came from when I was at university and I did a chemistry degree, and the Royal Society of Chemists came round and kind of sold to us the benefits that you can get from being in a member institution. As I kind of came out of my degree and realised that a world in the lab was not really for me, I did see a massive benefit still of having that network, the development opportunities, and the kind of CPD type activities that you can get from a member institute, and hence join the Institute of Water. Through that's really given me some opportunities to meet new people, to network, and to kind of broaden my knowledge and skill set. And as a result of that, that's helped shape my career opportunities in the places that I've gone to. there's a mentoring scheme through that, which I found really useful about. So where's the next step in my career? How do I develop, and what do I really want to do? What motivates me, and how do I bridge the gaps? So that's always been there. And then I kind of spent around about 10 years in the industry, I think it was. And I thought, it's really obvious now. I've moved around roles quite a bit. I've done all sorts of different things, from operations to engineering to business change. So, but what really lights my fire is the environmental side, which links back to my degree. I was always interested in the environmental chemistry side. So how do I do more in that area? And how do I gain the credibility in that area as well? And that's where we had the discussion around chartership. And actually then what does that give you, and what does that bring? So when I applied for my role at South Water, for a role that is obviously quite strongly balanced around the environment, having the chartered environmental status definitely had a big play in that, because as soon as you have that on your CV, it proves that you have experience in this area, and that you've been kind of independently ratified as being someone who's got experience and technical know-how in this area. So already you've ticked a box for your future employer that says, yeah, this person kind of does have an idea what they're talking about. And I think the key part of that as well, though, is the fact that it's not just it's my degree. I was given my degree and off I go. The last person you would want now trying to make aspirin or paracetamol for you is me. I don't do any of that sort of stuff anymore. It's not relevant to me anymore. But the whole point of a chartership is that you are continually assessed. So it's not that I passed an exam or passed an interview at one stage and therefore I was great at that stage. It's constantly being reviewed and assessed. So that is maintained, and I have to be able to evidence that it's maintained. And that's given a lot of credibility to my role within the organisation, but also outside of it. So when I'm having all these conversations with stakeholders, for example, that we talked about earlier, when I'm talking to environmental NGOs or the Wildlife Trust, the fact that I have got a chartership in this area means that already you've got some kind of validation and credibility in that space. And it's definitely helped some of those conversations and some of those relationships that we've built as we've gone forward.
Well, that is an excellent explanation of why to become a chartered environmentalist.
I did go off on one there, sorry.
That's quite all right. It wasn't with too much prompting either. It's fantastic. Now, we'll stick to the chartered environmentalist theme, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So when you became a chartered environmentalist, it's fair to say that you were at the young end of the scale when it comes to achieving the registration, which is an excellent achievement. Was it... You've kind of already answered this in a way, but was it always a goal to reach the Chartered Environmentalist status fairly early in your career?
I'm not sure about that, if I'm totally honest. So I wasn't 100% aware of it when I first kind of started out in the industry. And as I said, at one stage, I worked in kind of the engineering section, and everybody was going forward to chartered engineers because that's just what you did. Everybody went through that process. And I remember thinking at the time, well, that's great, but what is there for the rest of us who want to be able to demonstrate a level of competence? And then found the Chartered Environmentalist. And for me, it was around, yes, I can see a direct benefit to how it's going to help my career. And as I mentioned before, that kind of credibility it gives you. But for me, it was a little bit about some validation. So I mentioned earlier that it's really important to me to be able to feel like I'm making a difference in my role. And sometimes you can lose sight of that when you're in the kind of day-to-day stuff. You sometimes think, am I actually making a difference? And having the chartership for me has validated all of that experience that I have, all of the stuff that I've undertaken before, and shows that it has made a difference. So there is some kind of self-validation in there as well. And I think that's one of the reasons I kind of went forward to say, I am making a difference and I can continue to make a difference. And that's kind of proven through that chartership. So I think that's why. I also think we get to a stage where and particularly in the water industry, which has always kind of been, people have stayed in it pretty much all the way through their career. When I first started, there was this very much a view that unless you've been there 30, 40 years, you're not experienced and you don't have enough knowledge to be kind of classed as competent in this area and for people to kind of respect your opinion. And I remember thinking, well, actually, if I've worked in this area for quite a while, I probably do know quite a bit. And how do I get taken seriously compared to people who've been here for 30, 40 years? And how do I get to be seen on a bit of a level playing field in some areas? And I really saw the chartership as an opportunity to be able to do that, because, as I said, you've got that external validation and credibility that comes with it. So I think it was a mixture of all of those things, really.
Well, certainly on that last point, on many of the other points, you're not alone in thinking that way. So it is certainly a way to show that you're at a standard that people will see you as credible. And that can be seen whether it's across your colleagues or stakeholders or further afield. So that's really useful to hear. That drive to make a difference, is that what drove you also to become a board member at the Society for the Environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a lot of people out there that do a lot of good things for the environment, and they don't either feel they're doing it, like I said, or they don't get the recognition for it. I also think that the environment deserves to have really competent people in charge of it and looking after it and speaking out for it and protecting it. And I think kind of if you take both of those things together, that's where I really see the role of the Society for the Environment, about how do we get more people excited about this? How do we get more people to, be able to demonstrate what they're doing and how they're credible and the impacts that they're having? And how do we get that message out to more people that you are an environmentalist? You're not necessarily Greta Thunberg and you're not necessarily David Attenborough, but you are still making a difference and you're still very competent at what you're doing and you're delivering on the behalf of the environment. So for me, joining this, there's an absolutely great opportunity to be able to, how do we get that message out there to more people? How do we encourage more people to get excited about the environment and to stand up and take recognition for the great work that they're doing?
Quite right. Yeah. And having that competence piece to prove that for the environment as a whole, to have competent people to look after it or to develop it or to enhance it, it makes so much sense when you consider, you mentioned that becoming a chartered engineer is the thing to do for an engineer. Yeah. And generally speaking, you'd expect, if you're building a bridge, a chartered engineer, well, there'd be many chartered engineers involved, and that's just seen as the right thing to do. If you're looking after biodiversity net gain of a region or an area, then you would suspect that you should have competent people to be able to look after that, fulfill the requirements, to move it on to the next stage and grow it in that sense. So it makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned a couple of influential people there, Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough. Was there anyone who inspired you in the early stages of becoming more interested in the environment? Or is there a particular point in which you thought, I want to work in the environment?
Oh, I see. He's really cheesy because I am going to say David Attenborough. And, from a very...
It's not cheesy.
It's probably predictable though, isn't it? Yeah. But from a very young age, so my father was really into wildlife and nature and the environment. So from a very young age, I knew the name of all the birds in the garden, and we would do a lot of kind of animal watching, a load of watching of these kind of programs on TV. Really kind of lit my fire around that, and particularly then understanding the risks and the threats, not just to animals then, but as you kind of get older and you get the kind of a bit more of the larger piece of things, and you realise the kind of the fact that there is a whole section of this planet that doesn't have a voice of its own, and can't control what's happening to it. Whereas we, as kind of arguably the dominant force on our planet, are impacting on them, and when we've got a responsibility with that. I think growing up, I enjoyed the sciences at school. It was a very natural progression, I think, but very early doors. My dad got me into it, David Attenborough, and then, as you say, you just kind of as it becomes kind of more to the forefront now, we're talking about the environment far more now than we ever were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and it's becoming, there's far more. There's not just David Attenborough talking about wildlife now, that there are scores of people out there having these conversations, which is great news, and hopefully inspiring more people to get into the field.
Well, talking about inspiration at a young age and parents, I mentioned at the start of the podcast that one of the reasons I reached out to you to come on to EnvCast is because of a LinkedIn post that you did that I saw. So that's something I really wanted to talk about. It was a couple of months ago now, but it was all about a careers chat that you had with your 3-year-old daughter. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Could you give us a bit of an overview of what that post was about and the background of the conversation you had with your daughter?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So yeah, I've got a 3-year-old daughter, Zara, and she's at nursery at the moment. And they were doing all about jobs and professions at nursery. And she came home and she was talking to me all about police and doctors and vets and astronauts and kind of almost the cliche jobs that you expect kind of nursery school kind of children to come out with. And we're having a great conversation about the benefit that all of these jobs bring and what great jobs they do. And I said, do you know what Mommy does? No. So I tried to explain. She was just like, no, so I was like, I tell you what, how do we, this is not a core, the water industry, for example, or an environmental role is not kind of one of those core roles that kids learn about or dream about growing up traditionally. Not a train driver, a ballerina or astronaut, so how do we broaden kids' horizons and show them that there are other jobs that on the face of it might not seem immediately exciting, but how do we explain to them the roles and how beneficial and the impact that you can have. So I feel really strongly about working in the water industry and providing a vital service for people. You can't live without water. It's a real public service that I really believe is such an important role. Certainly not detracting from the importance of the roles I've previously mentioned at all. So I thought, well, so how do I get through to her? There are other opportunities and really show her what I do. One of my roles in my job is that I look after our main reservoir, Blithfield Reservoir, over in the South Staffs area. So Saturday, get her in the car, off we go. Let's go and see where Mummy's office is. So we had a little walk around the reservoir and sat looking at it and was able to explain to her then that this is what I do. And every time you wash your hands, it's Mummy that makes sure you've got the water to come out the tap. But also then when you're like Mummy's age, your little daughter or son will also be able to turn the tap on. So I think we've got there now because every time she kind of turns the tap on, she knows now to not leave it running when she's brushing her teeth. We've got all those sort of messages through. She understands that, but she's more excited by the fact that Mummy's office overlooks. She thinks I work in the reservoir and that I kind of go to work and swim around all day, which is a great job. I'd love that, but not quite right. But so if only for that reason, she thinks that the water industry is a great job now because you can just swim around in a reservoir all day. So I've got there a little bit, I think.
Well, it certainly sounds like you made a difference there. And what an excellent way of showing your daughter where you work. Because, I mean, currently I show my daughter that I work in an office, which isn't very exciting, it's fair to say. And in terms of an office, it's my little bedroom in my house. So it's even less exciting, although there's lots of things for her to grab and throw around. But that's a 2-year-old wherever you take her, I imagine. So in terms of that education to tell young people, whether they're 3 or maybe it probably becomes progressively more important to talk about it more, I suppose, as you progress towards the potential careers and training opportunities and education and that kind of thing. Do you think the landscape is changing or needs to change in terms of giving people the right skills to go towards a career in the environment, for example, which I would assume is a growing sector?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do. And I think some of it's starting to happen. So, for example, there's talks about having a biodiversity GCSE, for example. So, changing those core subjects and having some additional ones in there that start to immediately make kind of children and young adults see those opportunities from an earlier age, they will definitely help. We have an education programme at South Staffs and Cambridge Water where we go into local schools and we educate them on things like the water cycle and why it's important to save water, but we also do kind of a lot of careers fairs, and I've done quite a lot of talks now in the 18 months that I've been here. One of them was to 400 7-year-olds, which is quite frightening. And the first question they asked was, how much money do you make? So even at that age, they know what's important. And to trying to get into kids when they're really young about the different things that you can do and the different opportunities. We do things as kind of kids get to GCSE level, starting to move more into the university space as well, so that you're going into universities and you've got pupils looking at, well, what's next? And well, here's the water industry, and this is the variety of things you could do in the water industry, for example. So we are doing more and more of that, and we are using more and more people from our core business to do that, rather than we have an education team, but actually let's go and use some of those people who are in those roles who are really passionate about what they do and try and get some of that passion over to kids, because I think that's at that age, people want to do something that they, when they're young, and it's not all about money and mortgages and all of that sort of stuff. They want something that they can really, a vision that they can buy into and that they can feel passionate about. And so if we can sell that at a really early age, then so much better. But there's definitely more to do. But I do think it's completely. I'd never heard of the water industry until I was at university, really. We spent the whole time trying to be the silent provider. If you didn't know the name of your water company, it was because you'd never had to ring them, because there was never a problem, and that was all good. We're in a different world now completely, which is great. And so, the more we can kind of get these messages through, the younger, the better.
I think those messages are so important. I mean, I don't see myself as that old. So other people might disagree, but when I was going through, I think it must have been GCSEs, I was basically given the option of, if you're academic, you're probably going to be an accountant. If you're not very academic, you might be a builder, which I don't think is very nice to builders. But it was pretty much that, black and white. It was so narrow in terms of the opportunities that were presented to you from your careers advisor.
Absolutely.
Who must have got their job from somewhere. They weren't a builder or an accountant, so it didn't make much sense at all. And I personally was so lost with no ideas of where to go, because there was nothing in school to let you know where you should go. But these kind of outreach projects where you can go in and talk to schools and that kind of thing sound fantastic. Maybe my school got bypassed, I don't know, but didn't seem to come through. But it's part of the work that the Society for the Environment are going to be doing for the next few years, is around green skills and entry routes into all sorts of different parts of environmental work, whether it's water or ecology or the built environment or agriculture, whatever it might be. And we have started looking at it, and it is quite a daunting task. But we're looking forward to hopefully trying to make a difference in that space and making these opportunities more accessible. For those kind of people who are getting towards thinking about making decisions on their education route and that kind of thing, what would you say to those kind of people thinking about a career in the environment specifically?
So I think, I just say go do it. It's amazing. But as I say, I'm probably a bit of a geek in this area. So I would say if you really want something where you can feel you're making an impact and you're making a change, and it's going to be a long-term change. So I think you have to be accepting that what you do won't always yield immediate results. And sometimes it can feel like you're trying to turn the tide on things. And you can feel a bit of a lone voice at times. But if everybody joins those lone voices together, like they did in the world of recycling, when people very first started to recycle and went, well, I'm not going to make much difference on my own, and now everybody does it, it does make a sizable impact. So I think, some realism to go with it, in that, as I say, you're making changes now that will impact future generations, and you may not be here to see it, but you've done it. And if that's the sort of thing that lights your fire, if you don't need that immediate gratification from a job role, but you do like the thought of that lasting impact and legacy, then it's an incredibly rewarding area to work in.
Yeah, and it's certainly an interesting world to work in. I mean, I'm not necessarily doing an environmental job as such, but in terms of working with so many environmental professionals, you certainly get that idea of you're involved in something that's making a difference. And sometimes, on a day-to-day basis, you might not be seeing that progression, but eventually it does come through, and you can. It certainly makes a difference to your motivation when you get up in the morning and that kind of thing. So, what's next for you? That's a very broad question, but what do you have planned for the next year, 5 years or so?
So that's a good question. So I think for me, it is it's doing more in that environmental space, particularly. So in my current role, I'm looking at expanding my environmental team and being able to deliver more, as I say, over the next 5-year period. So as we move into these big river restoration projects, particularly on the chalk streams, I think that's going to be a really exciting time for us that I'm really looking forward to being more involved in and to drive in. I think it's that more of that longer term planning. I think from a career point of view, my career to date traditionally has been going from role to role based on what interests me and excites me. So I like a new challenge. I do still like to learn new things. I like to feel like I'm making a difference and I can use my existing skill set. So, I think I don't always have a very clear career path structure. I think after every 2 to 3 years, I start to think, right, okay, am I the best person to keep making a difference in this specific area, or does it need a new pair of eyes to come in and change it to the next level? And actually, it's my turn to go in and do something else. So yeah, every 2 to 3 years, look at the next challenge. I've got quite a background in going into areas where there's a problem and going in and turning the problem around, sorting it out, and then moving off to the next one. And I quite enjoy that kind of real problem solving, resolving a challenge and getting things going the right way. So so particularly in that kind of environmental area. But yeah, for me, that's the real clear steer. I really enjoy the water industry, so I'd love to see the rest of my career at least through there. But more and more into that kind of sustainability, environment, that long-term planning type area is definitely where my heart is, to be honest.
So probably heading headlong into another challenge by the sounds of it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Whether it be where you are at the moment or elsewhere, but yes.
I don't want to get bored. Love a good challenge.
Nobody wants to get bored. Before I move on to our last question, which we ask every podcast guest, I think that if the listeners who have enjoyed this podcast, the last podcast that we did with Laura Young is similarly inspirational in a very similar way. And I would certainly encourage people to go back and have a listen to that one as well, for a slightly different perspective from a different sector. But with similar inspiration. So I thought I'd draw those connections. But the last question is, if you were able to influence world leaders for a day, what would you focus on?
So I think it would be around continuity, consistency, and making some ambitious targets and sticking to them. I think particularly in the environmental field, but if it comes to aid, when it comes to all sorts of different things, we hear a lot of different targets, goals, aspirations, how many of them are ever delivered in the timescales that they're meant to be. So being held to account for the things that you say and deliver against them, particularly obviously as you expect me to say in that environmental area, but I think there's a lot more around. I mentioned the cost of living crisis earlier, foreign aid, etc. I think there's a load of areas where it's seen as easy to pull back on when the going gets a bit tough, because those areas aren't able to speak for themselves. So I think, yeah, for me, it is around do what you say you're going to do, have those ambitious targets and deliver them, and then be held to account if you don't, like we are. If we don't deliver in our jobs, we're absolutely held to account. So they should be too. This is true. From an environment point of view, I take it in terms of sticking to things that they've promised and that kind of thing. COP27 on the horizon. I guess you're hoping for good agreements to come from that and good progress. Yeah, absolutely. Progress might be tricky at the moment, but yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I think it is about how kind of building some of those those international ties where possible, but also acknowledging that we are where we are at the moment with some of that sort of stuff. You're not going to resolve that at COP27. So how do we work with the countries and the other areas and nations that are on the same page as us to be able to deliver stuff? We shouldn't put everything on hold because of other issues ongoing. So seeing some progress is really key all the time for this. So a lot of talking, and how do we deliver on those talks? Quite right. And here's a link that I didn't really plan, but when this podcast is released, we're pretty much on the doorstep of COP27, and the Society for the Environment have got a delegation who have observer status, and we're hoping to report back on the findings that they have when they are attending meetings virtually. So watch out on the Society for the Environment website for updates on that. But in terms of this podcast, that brings us to a conclusion. So a huge thank you again to Natalie for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. So thank you for your time. We'll see you then. Thank you for listening to today's EnvCast episode. If you'd like to hear more about the Chartered Environmentalist, Registered Environmental Practitioner or Registered Environmental Technician registrations, please look at our resources available at socenv.org.uk.
Alternatively, visit our YouTube channel where you can find a variety of environmental webinar series, registration guides, and various insights from registrants themselves. Just search for Society for the Environment on YouTube. To keep up to date with what's going on at the Society for the Environment, you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @SocEnv_HQ and via LinkedIn by searching for Society for the Environment with SocEnv in the brackets. We will release a new EnvCast episode on the first Wednesday of each month. So if you're interested in future podcasts, please do subscribe. You can subscribe and review through a variety of platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Castbox.